Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. My name's David Allan-Petale, and I'm the host of the Libby Book Club for WA. Welcome and thank you very much for your time. Tonight, my guest on the Libby Book Club for WA is Dave Warner, and we're going to be talking about his brand new book, Summer of Blood. Before we get stuck in, though, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm broadcasting to you tonight from the traditional lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. The Libby Book Club for WA is brought to you by Overdrive Australia, Libby, and of course the State Library of WA. So for everyone joining in tonight, I'm sure you know the drill, but joining the Libby Book Club for WA means that you get whatever book we're talking about each month with no holds. You go straight to the front of the queue, so you don't have to wait, which I think is a pretty important thing because, Dave, I read this book in 2 days. Congratulations on writing such a ripper of a story. I'd just like to introduce it by reading something that Freo Press sent me, your publisher, which I think really sums it up. So it says, when the Summer of Love was underway in the USA, Dave Warner was a cosseted private schoolboy, living it through the music and the magazines while wishing he was there. More than 5 decades later, with his own writing and music career well established, Dave couldn't resist the opportunity to experience it vicariously again, this time through fiction. Dave, is that a pretty fair summary of what inspired you or it maybe even forced you to do this?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is, David. That period was really important for me in lots of formative ways, and for my friends. I was about 13 at the time of the Summer of Love in 1967. So it was really informative or important time for me musically, and that led to other sort of cultural interests. So it was that, and it was also that I'd had these 2 characters that I first started in a book, 2 cops, Ray Shearer and John Gordon, who first appeared in my second ever novel, Big Bad Blood, back in 1999. I wrote that book, and that was set in King's Cross in 1965. And I always wanted to bring them back, and I was just trying to find a way. And over 25 years, I just couldn't find the right story for them. And then somehow my brain clicked, and I just thought, oh, this is my chance finally to vicariously put myself in at Haight-Ashbury in 1967 and to give those characters some new life.
Fantastic. Well, that enjoyment definitely comes through on the page. I had a cracking good time reading Summer of Blood. But before I get too stuck into it as well, just a reminder to everybody listening in, if you have a question for Dave, chuck it in the chat and we'll weave it into what we're talking about tonight. It can be about anything, preferably about Summer of Blood or the writing process. But, if you've got a question about music or anything like that, I'm sure Dave will be game to say that because Dave, can you maybe just, for people who aren't familiar with your whole career, can you maybe just give a bit of a summary of what you've been up to over 5 decades, in the public spotlight? You're, in WA, you're an icon here.
Look, I went to UWA and I was doing a psych degree there, and I always kind of wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know how to go about that. And I loved music, so I started at uni there in 1970 and formed a band. I was heavily influenced by people like Frank Zappa, who makes a bit of an appearance in Summer of Blood, and the Fugs. And I really liked that kind of anti-rock or an underground feeling. And I formed a band in Perth in 1972 called Pusk, which I think was probably Australia's first punk band. And we were we were well ahead of Johnny Rotten, etc. And so I did that for a few years because I figured, look, you can't write books when you're 18 or 19, but you can do this other stuff of having great fun playing in bands. So I went to England, got my ideas. I hoped I would make it there as a kind of songwriter or become a superstar there, but didn't quite manage to do that, but came back and had lots of ideas there about doing what I considered a truly kind of Australian popular art music form that I called suburban rock, because I thought all the strongest and best pop music that I heard came from people really talking about their backgrounds, which was great if you're in New York with exciting subways and fights, and West Side Story fights, or if you're in England and had gone through the Blitz or something. But if you were living in suburban Perth and it was just the Laminex table and the footy, that was kind of what you had to make it out of. And so I started from that, and I did that for a number of years, had a lot of success with my band, Dave Warner's from the Suburbs. And then around the 1980s, turned my attention to other sorts of writing and I think in about in the late 90s, I started writing, and my first book, first novel, City of Light, came out for Fremantle Press in 1995, and that then spawned another career for me as a screenwriter, doing television and film. And but I really loved writing. It's probably my first preference, although I'm still doing music. In fact, I've been rehearsing all day for some gigs for the band in Sydney and Melbourne. But I really, have got right back into it. And so from about 2014 now, the last 9 or 10 years, I've been working very hard, doing a lot of books. And this is my 12th crime novel and about my 25th book overall.
Yeah. Well, Dave, there's lots of questions about music coming up, I suppose, because music is a very important part of Summer of Love. But this is a crime novel. This is about mystery. This is about quite dark events that happen. Can you just tell us a bit about what Summer of Blood is about?
Yeah. So the idea with Summer of Blood is that
Summer of Blood, Summer of Love, definitely not Summer of Love.
But... Yeah. Well, Summer of Blood, yeah. John Gordon, the Australian cop I mentioned before, he's now risen from his early days into the homicide squad, and he gets a call in from his boss in the New South Wales Police Department saying the son of a well-connected Sydney person has dropped out of his university at Berkeley in San Francisco. The local cops can't find him, and it's important for political reasons that they try and locate him. So he heads off with his friend and fellow cop Ray Shearer to go to San Francisco on what's really a missing persons escapade, and they try and track this guy down. And they find out that this normal young Australian guy has got right into the anti-war movement, into acid. Everyone says, oh, he's an acid casualty, and he's fallen for a hippie girl called Spring. And Spring has disappeared, and he's gone off trying to find her, possibly to Los Angeles, or he could be dead. No one really knows. So they start to look for him. And then eventually they find him a little bit late, and they find him dead by the time they get him. And that should be the end of the story, except that he's been under this impression that there's a serial killer operating, and everybody has wiped him out and said, oh, look, he's an acid casualty. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But our two cops have 2 or 3 weeks on their hands before they can get a return flight. And they think, well, what's the harm? Maybe he was onto something, and they start investigating that, and it becomes darker and more complex. And in the end, they do end up finding themselves right at the crux of one of the most notorious murder cases in Los Angeles history. That's in real history, which I've interwoven with the fiction of Summer of Blood.
And Dave, that's the Black Dahlia, isn't it? That's the the holy grail of crime, mysteries, everything. It's still unsolved, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and of course is still something that just about any American crime writer certainly wants to have a go at, having their say into it and dipping their toe into that. And when I first came up with this idea, I did have the idea of taking Ray and John back to America. I thought it'd be pretty cool if 2 Australian cops actually solved that murder, but maybe couldn't talk about it. And then this kind of interacted with my whole idea of getting myself vicariously into San Francisco in 1967 and seeing Grateful Dead and Janis Joplin and all those people. And that was really how the book came about. But in terms of the book, they're not actually following the Black Dahlia murder. They're following the what's happened to this young Australian guy and what might have happened to his girlfriend, and that leads them by a circuitous route into this other kind of bonanza of crime.
Well, I really enjoyed this book because as a young guy, I read a lot of say Tom Wolfe. So, his things about the Merry Pranksters and that kind of scene. And I listened to The Doors and I inhaled all that 60s music. And I thought, geez, I've missed something a lot, quite big here, quite a big cultural move here. You felt the same way growing up in the 50s and 60s.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
It is this time, isn't it? 1967. Can you tell us a bit about what drew you to 1967? Was it the culture? Was it the time? Was it the the music, or was it just all of those things?
Yeah, look, it really was. It was all of those things. And I guess initially the interesting thing for me and my school friends growing up was the music. But in those days, in 1967, underground music, if you were living in a place like Perth, it didn't get played on the radio. So you never heard the Grateful Dead or Quicksilver Messenger Service or Country Joe and the Fish being played on West Australian radio. And you couldn't even get their albums until 6 months, sometimes a year or a year and a half, sometimes never released in Western Australia. So what happened was we kind of, by the circuitous route of going to newsagents and finding whatever magazines, which were usually only about 3 months out of date, we would grab pop magazines and we would read the pop magazines and see them and hear them, these people talking about albums and music that we hadn't heard. And so that set up this expectation of what the music might be like. And that was really interesting. And then that also generated other stuff for us. Like when my friend got one of the Frank Zappa albums, I think it might have been Lumpy Gravy or whatever, and Zappa on the back of it had listed all his kind of influences and people that he admired, from Segovia to Samuel Beckett. And so we didn't know who Segovia or Samuel Beckett was. So we started to look into these people. And so it opened up a whole new territory for us just from that. So it was all kind of blended. But it was also, I think, that the first time that the baby boomer generation started to become in the majority, and that youth was actually able to drive for a short time consciousness in some way. Don't want to overstate that, because I think it was still largely about fun and music, but there were, it was certainly involved in politics and political upheaval and Black Panthers and, loads of other things that were happening at that time.
And into this very complex world, situated in Los Angeles, Haight-Ashbury, and in San Francisco, flies DS John Gordon and CI Ray Shearer. What are they like as men, and also what are they like as people observing this? Because they're kind of fish out of water, but they're kind of enjoying it too.
Yes, yeah, they both, I think, look, they're both essentially good men. However, Ray Shearer's background, which for those who've read Big Bad Blood, or if they haven't, it's not available in print now, but Big Bad Blood is on ebook, so they'll be able to find that. Ray is a corrupt cop, working as a kind of bag man for gamblers and big criminals in King's Cross initially, and also he's a cop, but he's corrupt. He has his own sense of morality, and there are certain areas where he wouldn't cross and certain areas where he can. And he's a very dangerous man. And he also has this kind of philosophy of life that I'm never going to get this chance again, so I'm going to live life to the full in a way. So he's a very complex character. John Gordon's a bit more like an ordinary suburban boy of the late 1950s, early 1960s. He's grown up. He's a young cop. He's a kind of good guy. He's married his sweetheart, who he met in the first book, and they went through some traumatic times together, which has left him with a kind of PTSD, mentally scarred. So he's got a few issues to overcome, and he hasn't quite been able to overcome them in the last couple of years. And so for him, this journey into the White Rabbit world of San Francisco is terrifying and liberating at the same time. But I think the thing that I try and get with all my cops, good or bad, I try and give them a real humanity, and I think that comes through with those people. And at the end of the day, I believe most readers would feel, yeah, I'd like to have Ray or John in my corner. I think, they do the right thing by me.
Well, I think that's a pretty good note to maybe there's a scene from the book that you might read for us.
Sure.
Dave, which I think ties into that quite beautifully.
Yeah, well, this is early on. This is their first day. They've lobbed into San Francisco, and they think, okay, well, they've heard that this young guy that's missing was hanging out with hippies, so we better go and meet some hippies. And they're not quite sure where to meet hippies, but they get pointed in the right direction. So they're on the lookout for that. They've tried to get into the Fillmore and they've been told that they haven't got a ticket and they've got to go back. So pungent dope smoke turning the air blue. No regulation look. Cavalry jackets, boots, moccasins. Most girls with hair parted in the middle, hanging straight, but short cuts too. And afros. Paisley smocks, minis, crossed laces over white plastic boots. A small guy in deep conversation with a spade. Eric Burden? John swiveled, but all he saw now was the back of a Hells Angels jacket. They figured the hotel direction shuffled that way. Ray pointed at a yellow moon. At a yellow neon that read liquor. Let's get ourselves some supplies. Off the sidewalk into the store. Decidedly low rent. Bottles on shelves behind the counter. Coloured paper specials scrawled in texture on chopped card. The big store clerk arguing with a chunky, unkempt hippie chick, her beads clacking as she threw her arms about, waiting his turn behind a mustache and a watchman's hat, growing impatient. What's this bullshit? The chick's voice like a rasp on a hoof. Don't swear at me, miss. You gave me a fire. That's your liquor and there's your change. The guy looked like Hoss from Bonanza, big and balding and like he sweated easy. I gave you a 10, the chick turning to Mustache. You saw I gave him a 10. Pretty sure I saw a 5. The chick's hands on her hips. What is this, the Mo and Curly show? The witness says a 5, the storeman getting righteous. Now get. Mustache with a grin. Yeah, get back out there hooking. Mug like that, you're going to have to work awful hard to earn a 5 spot. That's no way to talk to a woman, mate. Shearer in close on Mustache before John had a chance to stop him. I'll talk how I like in my country, Limey, and the woman part is up for debate anyways. I think you should apologise. Shearer's gaze a steel blade. I think you should get... Shearer's left snapped the guy's chin before Mustache had managed to even draw halfway back his right hand. Mustache dropped like a dead fly. John reading the clerk's eyes. Should he reach for whatever he had under the counter? John shook his head at him. Come on, the customer is always right. Store clerk flipped out a 5. The girl took it, stuffed it in her jeans, gathered her bottle off the counter. Thanks to Shearer and John in turn. She walked out. Shearer smiled at the clerk. Mustache was moaning now. We'll have a quart of Scotch whiskey, your best cheap one. The clerk turned to the shelf and pulled out a flask, stuck it in a paper bag, twisted it like that was how he would have liked to wring Shearer's neck. $1 and a dime. Shearer shelled out, saluted the clerk with his whiskey on the way out. She was standing just up the street, waiting. I wanted to thank you boys, just didn't want to spend another minute in there. John said, you okay? You get used to that shit, but you don't expect it here in San Francisco. Where are you guys from? Shearer said, south and across the Pacific, Australia. She nodded. Vietnam. You're there too. You soldiers? John sensed she was going to put the hard word on them now, thinking, boys on R&R, easy money. No. She pointed at Shearer. You look like a cop. Yeah, a lot of people say that. Punch like Cassius Clay. Her eyes twinkled. What are you doing tonight? Yep, here it was. John decided to get in quick. Heading back to our hotel. It's been a long day. You want to go to the Fillmore? We tried that, said Shearer. A grand piano on the door didn't want to let us in. She smiled. I might be able to help. I got a bit of pull. Come on. John about to decline, but Shearer gave him no chance, following her back along the street. The air was still but carried a dampness. Hippies drifted past, mixed in with normal people clutching shopping bags. They cut up an alley. John tensed. His gun was back at the hotel. This is the back entrance, the girl said. John looked at Shearer, who seemed unconcerned. The alley gave onto another wider alley. Parked trucks, a few guys lounging about with vests, muscles, some big Harleys in a cluster. Another large dude at the narrow door. There with me, she said, and the guy stepped back. Maybe she was sleeping with the head man. A narrow passage, a fog of marijuana smoke. Another passage ran off halfway, a hint of music being pumped the other direction. I gotta go get ready. You guys head on up there. She pointed to the end of the corridor. They were already on. Thank you, Aussies. I appreciate a gentleman. I'm Janice, by the way. And that's Janis Joplin and how they get to meet Janice and Ray and Janice. You know, they actually, despite the odd couple, they get it on a bit.
Thank you, Dave. It's great. It's always great to hear the writer read their own words, I think. And I think it's a really good illustration of this point maybe you and I were talking about earlier, in that you have this very hard-nosed style for these parts, but then the next scene is they walk into the Fillmore where there's the psychedelic music and the prose just turns vivid and psychedelic, and you switch between these styles throughout. That's very deliberate, isn't it? But it's also very fun.
Well, it was kind of organic. The really hard-nosed style was deliberate in their first appearance, Big Bad Blood, which was unashamedly kind of, I got the idea from reading James Ellroy books. And when I wanted to do Two Corrupt Cops in King's Cross, I used a completely different style to what I do when which I had done in my first book with Snowy Lane in Perth, Western Australia. You know, because Perth's much more laid back and much more suburban. So I wanted a different style to kind of work with what my emotional feeling was of King's Cross in the years I played there in a band. Even though it wasn't in the 60s, I played there in the late 70s. And I found that kind of really hard, short sentence, muscular, I call it a muscular style of Elroy's really suited. And so when I was reprising these characters, I was definitely going to have some of that, because it was kind of, you know, their signature, their wardrobe. But within that, as you say, this is a different era. This isn't Los Angeles of the 50s or King's Cross of 1965. This is San Francisco in 1967, where it's peace, love, and floating music and acid and dope. And so that needed to be incorporated. And so in that part, it was just, I guess when you try and write that's just how it came out.
I'm going to be a bit clever and say, there's a Doors song where he says, out here on the perimeter, we is stoned immaculate. But this is the thing. Your guys go out to the perimeter, but it's definitely not immaculate, is it? They go really far out in this journey.
Yeah, they do. They go out as far as you can, and they make mistakes and question themselves. And neither of them are strangers to the evil that can lie and the darkness in men's hearts. But I think the perspective that they get, as you kind of mentioned earlier, that they've come into this place from their suburban world and they're thrown into a world where there are new possibilities, where there's a different consciousness, that maybe this can be a different time, maybe we can change the world, and maybe the old ways don't have to be pursued. And so I think they're struggling with that kind of idealistic thinking at the same time as they're having to wade knee deep in blood through a much more pragmatic and dark world, and cops, American cops who have a lot of other stuff on their plate and, don't have the 3 weeks to go and look for a missing kid.
Dave, you're getting some lovely comments here in the chat. So Bernie Wilburn says, this is great. I haven't read the book yet, but I'm definitely going to. So we've done our job.
Good on you, Bernie.
Janetta says, it's great, waiting for my print copy. I think it's Laura. She says, you set the scenes for music venues brilliantly. It's so easy to imagine being there at the time. And Bernie also says, I must say I'm gobsmacked to hear how many books this genius Dave Warner has written. I saw him in a play some years ago. There seems to be no end to his talent. That's pretty good.
Thanks, Bernie.
Dave, I might just pick up on Laura's comment. Imagining being there at the time. I mean, you can't get a time machine and go back there. But how did you put yourself into being there? You can listen to the music, you can travel there, but really you've got to have it in your heart, don't you?
Look, I think that's the most important thing. And I was able to channel my 13, 14, 15-year-old self, and gigs that I went to in Perth at The Happening, which were non-alcohol gigs run by 6PR, I think, in those days, where you saw bands and local musicians like Al Cash and Dennis James and Steve Tallis, that, they were kind of my heroes. So you could channel that part into, of course, the San Francisco end of it was much more sophisticated, and the guys were playing cover tunes from those eras. But the other thing that was surprising and was really, really great was that when I started to try and do research on this, I found this wealth of research of actual gigs that happened, and you can even go in to find set lists. So in all these shows, concerts, events that I have, featuring bands like Jefferson Airplane, Country Joe and the Fish, Janis Joplin, there must be 30 or 40 events probably mentioned, in the book where my guys are at, or they're following leads up. And all of those actually happened, and they actually happened on that day, except I think for one, I couldn't quite get a concert that I needed on a particular day, and everything else fell into it. So everything bar one was an actual event, and it's great that you can go and do that. And then I can still absolutely channel my 14-year-old excitement the first time that I heard the Doors playing Strange Days, or the first time I heard Country Joe and the Fish. So that was never hard to do. And of course, if you listen to the music, now it's still there, that kind of, there's a vivacity, I think anyway, there's a vivacity about that music. And 1967 was just incredible. Like, I know everyone says, oh, this was a great year for music, or that was a great year for music. But you had the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's coming out in the same week, I think on the same day that Frank Zappa's Absolutely Free was released. So you had these two incredible concept albums coming out at the same time. And then you had all the other great songs, Scott McKenzie with San Francisco, the Love song, and More Again. So Whiter Shade of Pale, all these kind of absolute top-notch songs that have been with us, and in a really wide variety of styles. So that's what I loved about it all.
Dave, there's often there's a seductive side to music, there's a glamorous side to music, but there's also kind of a dangerous side to music. And I'm thinking like Hey Joe, Jimi Hendrix, or Riders on the Storm. There's songs about death and about killers and this darker side of things. Was it interesting to write a crime story with very, quite serious and quite twisted labyrinth that you take us through, with this soundtrack of music that it's seductive to your ear, but it also has that edge to it?
Yeah, it was. And that was one of the things when I kind of first came up with that concept. I thought, oh, this could be great, because I'm not saying I'm the only person that's ever done this, but most of the time when people are doing fictionalized things of that period, it's not necessarily dark and crime. Yes, there's Jimi Hendrix died and people were taking too much heroin and choking on their own vomit, and there were things that were tragic and distressing, but I did really like this idea of blending this kind of romanticism, idealism, and this dark world of a crime novel. And essentially at the end, as I think you started out, Dave, which is the most important thing for me, as much as I love the music and it's a great thing, the most important thing for me as a crime novelist, you still got to deliver a really exciting and compelling crime novel. That's my number one thing. Otherwise, yeah, you could go and you could do a potted history of the time, or who your favorite band was, or your favorite 33 songs, and all of those were elements. But to me, they're the kind of icing on top, and the cherries. It's the meat of it is to do a crime story. And as you say, I really liked the idea of having this kind of beating evil heart of a world inside this kind of giant baby trying to get to know itself.
Right. Yeah. Come along for the ride. I think it's one of the who has it said it's like the ghost train. That was quite a
yeah.
I've got another comment here from Ruth, which will set us up for something. So it says she says it's the wry humor and descriptions of people and places I enjoyed. I don't usually read so much serial killers whose victims are women, but there was compassion and the music that made the difference. It's my third of DW's books. I live in Freo. I also went to UWA annual gigs.
Oh, great. Oh, great. Oh, good. I appreciate that. And yeah, I find that I don't write many serial killer books of females. I've done, I think this is probably only City of Light was the first one. And then Big Bad Blood sort of had that as an element, but was actually, there was a lot of other political machinations going on in the background to it. So each story, when I do it, when I have this first idea, they have their own voice and almost fully formed, and they tell me, this is the way that I need to express them. And so I don't, even though I've written, as I say, 12 novels, they're probably 5 or 6 different series or standalone books. And it's the story kind of comes to me, and then I go, well, who does this suit? You know, does this suit Snowy Lane? No, this doesn't suit Snowy Lane, but this would be great for Ray and John. Or no, it doesn't suit anyone in my stable of characters. This is a completely new character. You know, that's really a fun part of the process for me.
Would you consider, Dave, doing another story with these guys? You know, like you've taken them out again.
Yeah, look, I would, because I love Ray and John. They're 2 of my favorites. But having said that, I've also got all these other ones and other stories that have banked up. So this book I wrote probably 2.5 years ago now, and I've already got 2 more stories. One that will come out next November, that's finished and kind of pretty much off to the printer, not quite yet. And then another one that's at a bit earlier stage than that, but you know, the first draft is well and truly completed. And then other stories where I go, oh, I think I want to bring Snowy Lane back for another book. And another favorite book of mine, Espresso, the characters in there, I've got an idea for a story, so I want to bring them back. So it's a matter of, can I live long enough to do these books? You know, I wish I was doing this 30 years ago. I'd have more of a chance to get all the stories out of my head.
Dave, you said earlier that Ray's a bit of a bent copper, and also John's got a little bit of friction to him. Do you need to be, from a fiction point of view, a literary point of view, to solve crimes in a crime novel? Do the coppers need to be a little bit bent? You know, because I'm thinking, like, even Poirot has cunning about him. Even Miss Marple has that little, she'll put her cane out to trip somebody up kind of thing. Do they need that, just flirting with the line a little bit? And does that make it an entertaining thing to write?
Look, I don't think they have to. I think the answer to that is that most characters are, but it can be a real trap. I'm sure I get a bit sick of, and I'm sure readers get a bit sick of the cops who are loners, alcoholics, the family's busted up and everything's miserable in their life. And look, sometimes that's great for one particular, story or thing, but I don't want all my characters to be like that. But you are right. It seems to be very hard to have some well-adjusted people with a normal life, and the only ones I can kind of think about are Midsummer Murders, with Barnaby is and is actually married and has a family life.
How does he not have PTSD though? The amount of
that's about the only ones that I can think of. So it does make it difficult, but I do like the idea of just having a very, very normal suburban couple or something who might do something. But look, down the track, it does help, obviously, if your main characters have some issues, that working through the story will help them work through their own issues. Then it gives you that bounce in character as well as just plot. And I think all of us writing, and especially writing crime fiction, it's great to have those 2 elements working for you if you can get it.
No, absolutely. And maybe just to circle back to the comment from earlier about, that there's compassion in this novel. They're cynical characters, perhaps, they're hard boiled, but at no stage do they ever disrespect any women. They take their job very seriously. They're looking for things, and they treat it with respect. That really shines through in amongst this chaotic labyrinth that they don't quite understand. And though they may be slightly bent or have a bit of friction, they always stay true to their core, don't they?
They do. And I personally think that's really important with crime people and detectives. I've seen a few things. It tends to happen a bit more on television where the cops are suddenly breaking all these rules and getting drunk and going to, and I think, I don't know, I can understand they get drunk after they've solved the case or once they're back in their rooms, but not going on in the driving the police car drunk trying to solve the case. So, but I think most authors get that get the balance right. But it is important, I think, that whoever the predominant cops, detectives, protagonists are, that they they are very determined to solve the thing, or you might have an accidental. Elmer Leonard often has people who accidentally kind of find themselves pitched into a really complicated situation. But even within that, it's perfectly pitched in tones of what their character is and how their character would react.
Yeah. Dave, for this book, how did you research it? Did you just listen to a lot of music? You said you put yourself back in the time, but did you look at pictures? Did you do a bit of a trip somewhere?
Well, I hang on, wait 2 seconds there.
Yeah.
And
what's he got?
Just to illustrate the point.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. This is from my collection of 1970 or 69. It's a bit shiny there, so I'll just get it up there so it's not quite so shiny, but you might be able to see Hullabaloo magazines with the cream on front. Look, I've still got all my stuff from 1967. So in terms of that element of it, there was a lot of stuff that I knew, but I didn't know everything at all. I knew a little bit about the Diggers. I didn't know a super amount. The Diggers being a group in San Francisco who were kind of pivotal in the political cultural makeup of the place. As I said, I went on like other people do with research. I went and Googled things and found out stuff that I didn't know. And I actually found out a lot of stuff after I'd written the book. A couple of mates gave me some books to have a look at, and I learned even more things. I was thinking, oh, that would have been useful at the time. But it was a combination of things, but largely my affinity with that era, I think, was what was important for me. I think I really felt it was kind of somewhere in the core of Dave Warner was this experience as a teenager listening to these bands and trying to associate with it, and the old days when you had newspapers and stuff. And it's also a lot of fun doing research when you get into things and think, or when you're forced to go into research and think, oh, these guys are in America and they've got to get back to us. They've got to contact the boss in Australia. How do they do that? And then I started to remember, gee, I remember now as a kid when you had people who lived overseas, and it was very rare that you would get a call from overseas. But to make sure that you were home, people would send you a telegram, 2 days before, saying, I am going to call you, because you had to book a call or you had to make sure people were there. So those things, I remembered, oh, that's right. Yeah, you sent a telegram. So then I had to think, well, if the guys wanted to send a telegram in Sydney, how would they do that? And I figured, oh, well, they could. And some of these things may not be right, but I figured, oh, well, look, they'd probably go to the Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles and they'd probably be able to do it from there. But yeah, lots of different things. I didn't know that there was just exactly this time. There was a flight had just started up from Australia to San Francisco. It took a couple of days and it went via Hawaii and stuff. But, so it was. Yeah, that was good fun to learn that sort of thing too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, that something that's often said. I'm from the generation now. We've got smartphones, we've got everything on tap, and we don't have to wait for anything. But it blows people's minds now that D-Day was run with maps, or that we sent man to the moon with slide rules. Like, what I really enjoyed as well, like in Summer of Blood, was the logistics. Just those little details that it's a lot of happenstance and it's a lot of trusting each other. And I'm going to be here at this time, and you know what? You were there at that time.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I do remember, in my own life, when you arranged to meet someone, you often couldn't get to a public phone. So you had to say, look, I'll see you at 3:00 and hope everything worked. And sometimes people didn't turn up and you didn't know why they hadn't turned up. I spoke before about going to the 6PR happenings. And I remember I lived in Bicton and my mate lived in a bit further along in Melville. And so I would get the bus on the way there before he would. But in order for him to know that I was on the bus, as the bus was approaching, I would have to hang my arm out the window to let him know I'm on it. Because, so, oh, okay, he's on this one. So like little things like that. The bonus, of course, is that when you're doing something set in 1967 as a crime writer, you don't have to worry about DNA and about whether would it be possible to crack that phone? Can that signal be traced? And all this stuff that when I'm doing contemporary novels, like my next one is coming out. I had
Okay.
so much stuff that I had to do on that was very complicated. So yeah, you win some and you lose some.
Dude. And Dave, we're gonna have to jump back into the comments because it's blowing up. Can you see these? You've got lots of
I occasionally one pops up, but I'm usually
pops in.
yakking my head off and I miss it. So read it out to me, and yeah.
No worries. So Jayho says, I love how you've named each chapter with a song title. I don't know all the songs, so my next task is now to go through your song list. Dave, what do you reckon? Is Google going to be the friend there, or is there like Spotify? Can people?
Yeah. Because what I did was here, I actually got one step ahead of the game this time. So as I went, I created a song list. So every song that appears in some capacity, I put onto a song list, which is on Spotify, and I think it's might be Dave Warner's Summer of Blood. But if they log into my Spotify account, look for a playlist, they'll find the Summer of Blood, and it actually includes a single that I wrote especially and recorded with my mate Tony Durant, who is known as the grandfather of psychedelic folk in England. Tony's played guitar with me for years, and I wanted to do a song, which I did, a title song, Summer of Blood. So that's on that playlist too. And I made a few copies, just a couple of hundred, really limited edition, and I have dropped them around various bookshops around the place and said, look, if anybody buys the book, give them the single as well for free, just as a little bonus, and we've tried to get it as much as we can in the style of 1967. So I'll better send you one, David. I'd
love that.
I'll
is it
get
CD though? Or is it? Yeah. There's also a bit of chatter about the Fillmore. So that's a very famous venue in is it May? Yeah. What drew you to have that as a setting? That is it just an important place for you, or somewhere you've always wanted to be at that time?
Well, I did. It was the most iconic of the venues, and there were a couple of different Fillmores. So this Fillmore was actually the first one in 1967, and that was then replaced by a different Fillmore in a couple of years later, I think 68, 69, and then the New York East Coast Fillmore. Also, so people talking about the Fillmore, there's the East Coast Fillmore and there's the San Francisco one, but this is the first of the San Francisco ones. And one of the things that, like, I loved Country Joe and the Fish, and their album Electric Music for Mind and Body, big influence on me. And I was absolutely rapt to find that little passage that I read out earlier, where the guys are going to a gig and Janis is playing, that on that date that my guys are in San Francisco, that Janis Joplin supported Country Joe and the Fish at a sold-out gig at the Fillmore for the release, the launch of Electric Music for Mind and Body. So the little things like that were just so much fun, because they're part of your youth. And for younger people, it's probably, you're researching something and it might be, the first gig that Ed Sheeran ever did or whatever. But for me, this was my kind of time, and what I loved about it.
And you got to stick up for Janis Joplin.
Yeah, exactly.
That was bloody good.
There's also some comments, Dave, about the audiobook. Just about, how was the narrator chosen? And, what did you think of how that came out?
Well, I haven't heard the audiobook. I was just saying earlier to Julianne, who was also involved in this. Yeah. So I haven't heard the audiobook yet. What happened was the audio book producers, Wave Sound, contacted the publishers, and that out of courtesy, they don't have to, I don't get a veto on it, but they sent me a couple of things to have a listen. And and they had somebody who they were very confident would do a great read, because they wanted somebody who could do American and Australian accents and things. And so I said, look, I'll go with you guys, and whoever you recommend, I was happy to do that. It's one of those things where, as an author, I don't get to do it unless I read it myself, which I've done on a couple of books, but not on my own fictional things. I thought it was good to have a different voice in there for that. But so I hope I'm looking forward to it, and I hope that whoever made that comment, be good to see what they thought. I know Julianne liked it, so it's a really great aspect of things for authors, because it's very hard to get shelf life and to sell hard copy books. but I think the slow process ebooks have a long life, which is great, even though our royalties may not be great out of them. But now audiobooks give it this other dimension, and I think in something like this in particular, I mean, I would have loved to have been able to have an audiobook and actually have the songs in there, but the money that they wanted just to have to quote a lyric from a song was beyond the budget of what the book would have been. So I ended up with one song that I was able to quote a lyric from.
Nice. Yeah, it's good to show that. Well, it's a good point about audiobooks though too, right? That it does bring in different kinds of readers. I know so many people who say, I don't read books, but I listen to audio. So it caters for that, just the different brain, the different way that we like to process information or connect with something.
Absolutely. I think it really does, because people who just wouldn't read at all, and look, I have loads of my friends who are big on audiobooks, and if you're in somewhere like Western Australia, and you are driving, and you're driving big distances, it's a great way to occupy yourself. Driving, if you're driving from Perth to Geraldton, or going to Mount Magnet or somewhere, or Albany to Busselton, so it makes a lot of sense if you can do that as well. But I'm really pleased about it, and I hope they keep rolling on, keep expanding.
I mean, Dave, I'm really enjoying talking to you. I mean, I've got one book out, and I'm sort of starting off in my career, I guess. So I just want to ask, like, how do you keep your lust for life here? It seems like you're a guy like at 18 who just went, stuff it, I'm going to go on the stage and I'm going to do these things. And you've still got that spirit. I mean, what's your maybe life philosophy here?
In terms of the art stuff, it's just, I just love doing it. And I feel really fortunate that I had that opportunity. But like anything, you've got to work at it, and there's downtimes and disappointments. But for me, the enthusiasm is just, I love writing. I always love telling stories, and whether it's musical, doing it by a musical form, or on television, or through a book, I just love it. It just, speaks to me, and I couldn't be happier. It's when I was 12 years old, I said to myself, if I wanted to do any, you had to fill in a thing at school. What do you want to be? And I put, I want to be a writer at 12. And of course my dad said, oh, that's ridiculous, you can't be a writer, which was probably true. So
yeah, I
was a garage band musician for 10, 15 years, and then now I'm too old to do anything else.
That's right. Well, I've just discovered you and I have a connection in that Andrew Johnston, who's your narrator for Summer of Blood,
right,
actually the narrator for Locust Summer, my book. Yeah, so he's just got this great he's a great actor, so he's just got this great voice. But so that's pretty cool. So
yeah.
I've just discovered another connection though. Actually, I read your acknowledgements the other night. Peter Holland.
Yeah.
Peter Holland was my lecturer when I was at uni, and I also had Murray Jennings. Now, Peter Holland and Murray, just for anyone else's context, that Peter was a very famous radio announcer. Can you tell us a little bit about him and how he helped you come into the world of music?
Yeah, well, as I said before, and as I mentioned in the acknowledgements, in Perth in 1967, you didn't hear virtually, I think, of all those tracks there, you might have heard 2 on commercial radio, 2, maybe 3.
What the hell were they playing?
There were a couple of little ones that you would hear from, and you might hear like the Mamas and the Papas. You would hear them say, and you'd hear Scott McKenzie, San Francisco, and Whiter Shade of Pale. But the great majority of bands like Grateful Dead and Janis Joplin, you just didn't hear. But Peter Holland had a show on the ABC, and he used to play. I'm not sure whether Peter Holland's Little Dream World, whether that was in 67, it might have been a year or 2 later, but he and a couple of other DJs like him, but particularly Peter, really for us kids who were 14 or whatever, we'd be hanging out to listen to what he was going to play. And he would play all these bands like Climax Chicago Blues Band or Savoy Brown or Grateful Dead. And that was really exciting and underground, as we said. And of course, I think sometimes he'd get bumped because of the cricket, but that was okay because we all followed the cricket too. So you'd be listening to Charles Fortune, was that his name, from South Africa, or Brian Johnson or somebody from Lords, and if the cricket was washed out, maybe you might get a bit of psychedelic music, or vice versa. You wouldn't get your psychedelic music, but you got the cricket instead.
Yeah. That's great. I just find that incredible that there can be this enormous cultural explosion happening around the world, and yet in Perth they're playing, Nana Muscuri. Yeah.
Yeah, and tie a yellow ribbon and those things. But I think I don't think Sydney or Melbourne were much different. I think they probably had a couple more things than us, but they were kind of probably pretty much the same. And it was still probably the Mersey sound and the English pop sound was still reigning at that time. And it was most likely only after the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper's that commercial radio started to play people like the Doors. I think anyway. I could be wrong. Someone will know better than me because many music aficionados, but that's my memory of it anyway. It was really hard to hear any of those acts on radio.
Well, maybe just a question to tile that together. Do you prefer living now where you have access to absolutely everything, but perhaps things aren't so secretive or illuminative?
Yeah.
Or was it better to be back then and a bit cosseted and for things to explode through the membrane?
Yeah, I think it was much better then. And the reason is more because I think you had to really work hard. You had to really desire, and nothing was just laid on your plate. You had to go and investigate, and that process of investigation, that could mean after you've at school, you're flat out, but you still got to catch a bus up into the city to Musgroves or Vox 18s to see if you could find this particular single or album, and then get all the way back down to the southern suburbs or something and still do your homework or whatever. But I think that was a really good thing. And I think one of the reasons that Perth produced and has produced a lot of musicians who do things that are I'm only talking music now, but I think this would probably be the same for visual arts or books for that matter. But I reckon if you looked at international successes of Australian people, that you would find a much greater proportion, given the population of people coming out of Western Australia, and for me than from Sydney or Melbourne. And for me, the reason for that would be that we were isolated, we were deprived of all of this, and there was no kind of second string. There was no way to make yourself an almost celebrity like you could in Sydney or in Melbourne just by ripping off something that you heard. I'm talking music here because that was at that time was the most thing. They go and record something that sounded like the Searchers or like the Stones. Wasn't as good, but you could still get airplay. You could still appear on television. You could still get in the newspaper. You didn't have that in Perth. So in Perth, it was kind of like you were right down onto whatever it was. You had these influences, and then you generated your own originality. And I think that is one of the reasons that people who come from here stand apart, and international people go, gee, I haven't seen anything like that before. I like that. Whereas some of the artists from eastern states are kind of a bit more halfway there. They've already, we're almost there, we can do this. Anyway, that's a theory of mine, which could be complete bunkum, but I always kind of felt that. And
I feel that way. I feel that way with writing too. Like, WA writers sort of punch above their weight, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it is unique, and I think it is that fact that, look, it may be lessening now because there might be other elements to it, but I think of my generation of people and later ones of the Tame Impalas or the Triffids or the artists of the 70s and stuff. I think 70s and 80s. Yeah, it was a good, really interesting time. And anyway, look, I could be wrong, but there was something about the spirit of that time, and something about being deprived. This all goes back to your question: being deprived of an easy route to get to success or to get there. That I think made people work hard at it.
And just to tie it all together with Summer of Blood, I mean, your two coppers don't have DNA evidence. They don't have satellites. They don't have all these modern things that can promise, I guess, to give you a shortcut. They've just got old school gumshoe. Why don't we just go talk to someone? Let's call them up. I mean, was that fun to be within that space? I know you're writing something now that's set in more contemporary times where you've got those hacks, but here this is old school. This is you've actually got to put together the spider's web yourself.
Yeah, look, I love that, and I think a lot of the great writers that Chandler's and those very seminal detective fiction writers, especially out of Los Angeles, gave me a chance to go that. I love that kind of period of stuff, and you notice a lot of times, as you say, it's a lot harder. And I notice on contemporary television shows, they have to work very hard to make it. Even the Scandinavian Scando Noir ones that I like, they always have to go back to the old abandoned orphanage or something where still miraculously there's still a few filing cabinets around, and they have and they've got some old Kodak prints that are just missing a bit. So I think it does actually help stories, because, as you say, the cops have to go just like we did as kids trying to find the music. The cops want the thing. They have to actually get out and spend some leather on the footpath, and could get a crack over the head, or they don't know what's going to happen to them.
Well, Dave, we're running a bit short for time. This has galloped along. What have you got coming next? Can you reveal anything? Can you give us a
sure.
hint?
Yeah. So the next novel that will come out is titled When It Rains, and it's a Dan Clement novel, the fourth in the Dan Clement series. And Dan Clement, for those who don't know him, is a detective based in Broome in Western Australia. This next one actually has Dan doing a little bit, most of it's set a little bit further in the East Kimberley, around Kununurra and around that part of the world, but still in Broome as well. So I didn't want to abandon. I like the fact Dan has this kind of team of people, and I like using them. And I just had the rough idea for that when I sat down, and I thought I want to do something for Dan, and I had a few ideas kicking around and a few titles. And I just thought, and the other Dan Clement things are like Before It Breaks and Clear to the Horizon, and It Never Rains But It Pours came to my brain. And I thought, that wouldn't be a bad starting point for a book that suddenly is all these different cases going on. And so that's really gave me a good starting point for the book, that nothing much is happening, and Dan's bored, going, I wish something would happen. And suddenly he's inundated with lots of different things, including a particular grisly murder, which I won't say too much about just at the moment, but he has to investigate that.
What month can we expect it to come out, Dave?
I think it's slotted for next November, so it's quite a while, and I probably will have hopefully knocked off another couple of books by then. And in the meantime, with that, still recording. So I've got another an album that I've also been recording this year of new material. Oh, it's actually some quite old songs, but also some new ones too. And now that this is all out of the way, I'll probably get that out in December, January, sometime around then.
Jeez. It's a busy time. I like it. I love it a lot.
Yeah, well, you got to keep busy, especially David. You're still young, but as we get older, we go, I've got to get through this in time.
That's true. I got two little kids to wrangle, so that takes up
yeah.
Well, I'll get there. Well, look, Dave, absolute pleasure to speak to you tonight about music, crime, the 60s, now contemporary crime, everything. It's been an absolute pleasure. Summer of Blood is available right now on the Libby Book Club. You can also get it through your local library, but also in any local good bookstores. Dave, maybe just a final word on Summer of Love.
Summer of Blood, yes. Look,
Summer of Blood. Sorry, I keep saying Summer of Love.
Well, it is the Summer of Love too. Look, it was an absolute joy to write. It's the most fun that I've had writing a book, because it was kind of a personal, little personal odyssey for me. And I didn't know how it would necessarily be received, because it's a different style, and especially first 20 pages or so might be a bit difficult for people to get into the rhythm and the style. But I've been really, really excited and overwhelmed by the reaction, which so far, I mean, look, we tend to only hear the best reactions and not so much the bad ones. But I think people are really loving it, and that's fantastic. It's just great. It's great to do something that you love and to get that feedback from people that they love it too.
No, they absolutely are. And I'll just sneak it in. Julianne from Libby said there's 673 loans on the ebook and 273 loans on the audiobook. So it's doing bloody well.
Great stuff. And thanks so much, Libby, David, Julianne, everyone involved, and the libraries of WA. I love it. I can't wait to get back there with Tony Durant and maybe do another little tour next year, maybe.
Absolutely, I'll be there. I'm sure quite a few of the people in the chat will be there too. We'll be there. Well, look, thank you very much. That's all the time we have for the Libby Book Club for WA. Thank you very much for your time tonight and for joining us. Thank you, Dave Warner, for joining us. Summer of Blood. I got it right in the end.
Yeah, great pleasure. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.